Hello, everyone. Welcome. Tonight, we will discuss terrifying events, true stories that have occurred on this earth. Get comfortable, stay relaxed, and let's dive into it on Midnight Lullabies. Story 1. In a quiet neighborhood in East Hempfield Township, Pennsylvania, a chilling crime shattered the calm on September 11, 2022. A man named Miguel A. Rodriguez took the life of his girlfriend, Nemesis Florentino, in a brutal act of domestic violence that would later spiral into a violent standoff with police. But what makes this case even more disturbing, he filmed her lifeless body and sent it to a friend. This is not just a story of murder. It's a story of escalating violence, ignored red flags, and a justice system that would soon have to reckon with one of its most shocking cases in recent history. In today's video, we're diving deep into the case of Miguel Rodriguez, exploring who he was, who Nemesis Florentino was, what led to that horrific day, and how it all ended in a hail of bullets and a lifetime prison sentence. This is a true crime deep dive, an hour-long investigation into the life, crime, and consequences of a man whose actions left a community in shock. Viewer discretion is advised. To understand the events of that day, we have to go back. Before the police standoff, before the courtroom verdict, there were two people, Miguel Rodriguez and Nemesis Florentino, living together in a modest home in East Hempfield Township, Pennsylvania. Nemesis Florentino was 33 years old. By all accounts, she was kind, vibrant, and known for her loyalty to those she cared about. While her public presence was limited, those who knew her described her as someone who valued connection, and who often put others ahead of herself. Her relationship with Miguel Rodriguez, 40, wasn't something most people had deep insight into. The two shared a home, and from the outside, there wasn't anything that immediately raised concerns to neighbors or the public. But as is often the case with intimate partner violence, what happens privately doesn't always match what others see. Miguel Rodriguez had a past that included documented signs of aggression. Though not extensively detailed in the public record, there were indicators that he had experienced personal challenges and may have struggled with control and anger issues. His behavior wasn't always consistent, and those close to him may have noticed moments of volatility. But it's important to note, this wasn't a story that was in the news before the tragedy. There were no public incidents, no media reports hinting at what was coming. And that's one of the reasons this case shocked so many. It came without warning for those on the outside. What we know is that Nemesis and Miguel were living together at the time of the incident. And like many people in long-term relationships, they shared a routine, the kind that's built over months or years. Morning rituals, shared meals, quiet nights at home. But over time, tension may have built beneath the surface. It's unclear exactly what the nature of their relationship was in those final months. What arguments were had, what boundaries may have been crossed, or what warning signs, if any, were present. What we do know is that the situation at home had reached a point where violence would become the final, devastating outcome. This part of the story doesn't have clear answers. There were no long interviews or social media posts from the couple that gave much insight into their dynamic. There's no detailed timeline of escalating events. What we're left with is what happened next, a moment that ended Nemesis's life and changed Miguel's forever. On September 11, 2022, that quiet life they shared ended in an act of violence that would later be documented and sent out in a deeply disturbing way. In the next section, we'll walk through exactly what happened on that day, and the actions that turned a private conflict into a public crisis. It was a Sunday like any other. In East Hempfield Township, the morning of September 11th started quietly. There were no alarms sounding, no visible signs that anything was out of the ordinary. But inside one home on Honeysuckle Drive, a deadly situation was already unfolding. At some point that morning, Miguel Rodriguez shot Nemesis Florentino in the head. There were no immediate witnesses to the crime. It happened behind closed doors, in the place where they both lived. What followed wasn't just shocking, it was deeply unsettling. After killing Nemesis, Rodriguez recorded a video of her body. That video was then sent to someone he knew. The act of recording, and the decision to share it, turned the situation from a private tragedy into a wider emergency. Authorities were alerted after a person received the video and contacted police. That call led officers to the home, where they encountered a highly dangerous situation. As officers approached the house, Rodriguez began shooting at them. Over the course of the next several hours, more than 100 rounds would be fired from inside the home. Police took cover, trying to communicate, but Rodriguez refused to come out. A full tactical response was launched. Negotiators, SWAT units, and crisis teams were all brought in as the standoff escalated. The standoff lasted nearly 5 hours. Throughout that time, officers tried to make contact. Rodriguez stayed inside, heavily armed, still firing rounds sporadically. No hostages remained. Nemesis was already gone, but the risk to law enforcement and the neighborhood was very real. Eventually, officers made a move. Rodriguez was shot in the arm during the takedown and was finally taken into custody. From beginning to end, the situation had gone from a domestic murder to an hours-long armed confrontation with police. Inside the home, investigators found what they expected, the victim's body, and evidence confirming Rodriguez's involvement. The scene was described as violent and disturbing. There was no ambiguity. No one else had committed the crime. No one else had been inside. For the community, the reality set in slowly. A woman was gone. A man was in custody. And many were left asking the same question, why? In the hours that followed, news of the standoff and the video spread quickly, not just through law enforcement channels, but into the public space. What had started as a single violent act became a story that made headlines across the country. As Rodriguez received medical treatment under police guard, the case was already shifting from emergency response to legal preparation. Investigators began building the timeline, collecting digital evidence, and preparing to bring charges that would carry some of the most serious penalties possible. The autopsy confirmed what the video already suggested. Nemesis Florentino had been shot in the head. She died instantly. There were no signs that she had time to escape, defend herself, or seek help. In the next chapter, we'll examine how law enforcement handled the aftermath, how the disturbing video became a key part of the case, and how prosecutors began building the charges that would follow. After Nemesis Florentino was killed, Miguel Rodriguez made a decision that added another layer of horror to the crime. He recorded a video of her body and sent it to someone he knew. That person, shaken and unsure of what to do, contacted police. This single act triggered the entire chain of law enforcement response. Without that video being sent, it's possible the murder might not have been discovered right away. It was the content of the video, and the decision to share it, that led directly to Rodriguez's arrest later that day. Detectives who reviewed the footage described it as deeply disturbing. It showed Nemesis after the shooting, with clear evidence of what had happened. There was no doubt who was behind the camera. Rodriguez didn't hide his identity. He didn't attempt to cover up what he had done. For the friend who received the video, the experience was traumatizing. While their identity hasn't been made public, officials confirmed that the person immediately did the right thing. They contacted authorities and turned over the footage. From an investigative standpoint, the video became a crucial piece of evidence. It placed Rodriguez at the scene, connected him to the act, and showed a level of intent that prosecutors would later use in court. It's not often that investigators receive this kind of direct evidence. Most cases involve interviews, forensics, timelines, and piecing together what happened. But in this case, the recording left very little room for speculation. It confirmed the worst, in a way that written statements or even witness accounts could not. Law enforcement officials stated that the video was instrumental not only in making the arrest but in securing the conviction. The clarity and context it provided removed any uncertainty. It was direct. It was conclusive. And it was incredibly difficult for those involved to watch. This part of the story is hard to talk about, because behind every legal term, behind every piece of evidence, there's the reality of what was lost. Nemesis Florentino wasn't just a name in a file. She was a person with a life, and this recording captured the moment that life ended. For her family, her friends, and the investigators, it was a painful reminder of the violence she experienced. The use of the video also raised questions about how digital evidence is handled in sensitive cases. Who gets access to it? How is it stored? And what happens to the person who received it in the first place, someone now involved in a criminal investigation through no fault of their own? The video changed the direction of the case. It moved law enforcement quickly. It gave prosecutors a strong foundation. And it left a lasting impression on everyone who had to witness it. Next, we'll walk through the police standoff, what happened after the video was sent, how Rodriguez responded to law enforcement, and how officers brought the situation to an end after hours of tension. By the time police arrived at the home on Honeysuckle Drive, they were already aware that the situation was serious. The video that had been sent was enough to initiate an emergency response. But no one knew exactly what they were walking into. Officers approached the property cautiously. There was no immediate contact with anyone inside, and no signs of life around the home. Then, without warning, gunfire erupted. Miguel Rodriguez had armed himself and began shooting from inside the house. In that moment, the case shifted. It was no longer just a homicide investigation, it became a dangerous, active threat situation. Rodriguez was not attempting to leave the house or surrender. He remained inside, firing dozens of rounds at officers over the next several hours. Law enforcement quickly called in backup. SWAT units, crisis negotiators, and armored vehicles were dispatched to the scene. The neighborhood was locked down. Nearby residents were asked to shelter in place or evacuate if safe to do so. The standoff lasted nearly 5 hours. During that time, crisis negotiators attempted to reach Rodriguez through phone calls and loudspeakers. They encouraged him to exit peacefully. But he refused to come out. Throughout the standoff, Rodriguez continued firing from inside the house. Officials later confirmed that over 100 rounds were discharged. No officers were hit, but the risk to their safety was constant. It was a delicate situation. Officers were forced to balance the need to protect themselves with the effort to de-escalate the threat. For hours, they held their positions, waiting for an opportunity to act without further loss of life. For hours, they held their positions, waiting for an opportunity to act without further loss of life. Eventually, tactical teams made their move. In a coordinated effort, officers advanced and confronted Rodriguez directly. During this operation, he was shot in the arm and taken into custody. No officers were injured. Rodriguez was treated on the scene and then transferred to a hospital under heavy police guard. Once stabilized, he was moved to a secure detention facility. Back at the house, investigators began the process of collecting evidence. Inside, they found the body of Nemesis Florentino and the weapon used in the shooting. The home was marked by signs of the gunfire exchanged during the standoff. Officials praised the response of the officers involved. Despite the volume of gunfire, no lives were lost during the standoff itself, and the situation was brought under control without further tragedy. But the emotional and psychological toll of the incident lingered long after the house was cleared. For neighbors, it was a day they would never forget. The sound of gunshots, the sight of tactical teams, the sudden disruption to daily life, all of it left a lasting impact. With Rodriguez now in custody, the case would move into the legal system. Prosecutors began preparing charges that reflected the severity of what had taken place, not only the murder of Nemesis Florentino, but the danger he posed to law enforcement and the community during the armed standoff. Coming up next, we'll break down the legal proceedings, the charges Miguel Rodriguez faced, the evidence presented in court, and the final outcome that ensured he would never walk free again. In the weeks following the incident, prosecutors worked to organize the evidence, the video Rodriguez recorded, the firearm recovered from the scene, and statements from police who were fired upon during the standoff. Rodriguez initially entered a not guilty plea, which is common in high-profile criminal cases. This allowed time for both sides to review the details, consider possible defenses, and prepare for the legal process. But the weight of the evidence against him left little room for doubt. The video he recorded, combined with forensic evidence and eyewitness accounts, made it clear who was responsible. After several months of proceedings, Rodriguez entered a guilty plea as part of an agreement with prosecutors. This decision avoided a lengthy trial and brought the case to a close more quickly than expected. Lancaster County District Attorney Heather Adams called the case one of the most horrifying her office had seen. She confirmed that Rodriguez would face the maximum possible penalty under the law, life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, prosecutors emphasized that the crime was premeditated, violent, and left no room for leniency. The plea ensured that Rodriguez would remain behind bars for the rest of his life, without any future opportunity for release. The sentencing brought legal closure to the case, but the emotional aftermath remains. Nemesis's life was taken in a way that can't be undone. For her family and those who knew her, justice through the legal system doesn't erase the loss. Still, many saw the guilty plea as a step toward accountability. It spared the family a trial, avoided re-traumatizing witnesses, and confirmed that Rodriguez accepted full responsibility for what he had done. Miguel Rodriguez is now serving a life sentence in a Pennsylvania state correctional facility. There is no eligibility for parole, no appeals pending, and no path to freedom. The case is closed, legally and procedurally, but the memory of it continues to resonate in the community where it happened. In the next and final section of this story, we'll reflect on Nemesis Florentino's life, the impact of her death, and the broader conversation surrounding domestic violence, law enforcement response, and the people left behind after tragedies like this one. By the time court proceedings ended, Miguel Rodriguez had been sentenced, and the legal system had done its part. But what was left behind couldn't be resolved with paperwork or prison time. This wasn't just a criminal case, it was the end of a life. Nemesis Florentino was 44 years old when she was killed. Those who knew her remember a woman with a strong personality, someone who worked hard, and who had been in a long relationship with Rodriguez. Like many victims of domestic violence, her story wasn't known to the public until it was too late. Details about their relationship, how it began, how it changed, and what led to the violence, remain mostly private. But one fact stands above all: Nemesis didn't deserve what happened to her. The suddenness of the violence, and the way the crime was discovered, left family, friends, and an entire neighborhood shocked. There were no public warnings. No protection orders. No calls to police leading up to that day. Just a tragic outcome that came without notice. She was quiet. Friendly. We never imagined something like this would happen here. It all happened so fast, then suddenly the street was filled with police and we couldn't go outside. What makes this case even harder to process is the recording Rodriguez made. The video was central to the investigation, but for those involved in viewing it, it left an emotional scar. The detectives, prosecutors, and especially the person who received the video, each carried the weight of having seen something they never should have had to see. Though Rodriguez admitted guilt, that doesn't offer healing. What it does offer is certainty that he will never be free again, and that Nemesis's story was taken seriously by the system. Stories like this highlight the importance of recognizing signs of abuse, even when they aren't visible. Domestic violence doesn't always look like shouting or bruises. Sometimes, it's about control, isolation, and fear behind closed doors. In the United States, nearly 1 in 3 women have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. Many never report it. And many don't know where to turn. If you or someone you know is in a situation that feels unsafe, even if there hasn't been physical violence, there are people who will listen and help without judgment. The National Domestic Violence Hotline offers free, confidential support 24/7. Local shelters and crisis centers can also help create safety plans or provide emergency housing. It's never too early to ask questions. And it's never too late to reach out. There's no way to fully measure the impact of Nemesis Florentino's death, on her family, on her community, and on those who worked the case. What we can do is remember her name. Talk about what happened. And do what we can to make sure others don't face the same fate. This story, like many others, reminds us that behind every headline is a person. A life. A set of hopes and relationships that didn't deserve to end this way. The justice system can only go so far. True change comes from awareness, support, and early intervention. If this story helps even one person reach out, or one friend notice a warning sign, then Nemesis's story won't be forgotten. Thank you for watching. Please consider sharing this video to help raise awareness. And if you're in a position to support domestic violence shelters or advocacy groups in your area, your contribution can make a real difference. If this story moved you or made you think, please consider subscribing to the channel. We cover true stories that matter, with the care and depth they deserve. Leave a comment below if you have thoughts to share, or if you want to honor Nemesis's memory. Your voice might help others feel seen or supported. And if you found this story helpful, liking it helps more people discover these stories. Story 2. On a quiet July morning in Birmingham, Alabama, tragedy struck a young family. A mother, her 5-year-old son, and her boyfriend were found shot to death inside a car. But in the midst of the chaos, one small act would become the key to solving the case. Her name was Arkia Berry, but to those close to her, she was simply Kia. At just 28 years old, she had already experienced her share of life's challenges. Still, she focused on what mattered most, raising her son, Landon. That bond between them was everything. And in her final moments, it was her strength and presence of mind that helped investigators uncover the truth. This story isn't just about loss. It's about the people behind the headlines, the mother who did everything for her child, the little boy whose life was just beginning, and a man trying to reconnect with the people he loved. It's also about the community that grieved, and the investigators who followed every thread to make an arrest. In this story, we'll take a closer look at the events surrounding this heartbreaking case. We'll walk through the timeline, the evidence, and the impact it left behind. And we'll hear how one final message, a single name, led police to the man now facing capital murder charges. Arkia Kia Berry was a daughter, a mother, and a friend. Those who knew her say she had a warm spirit and a heart full of love, especially when it came to her son. Her social media showed the everyday joys of parenting, birthday balloons, silly faces, proud moments. She was hands-on, devoted, and deeply connected to her little boy, Landon. Landon Brooks was 5 years old. He had just started kindergarten and was full of curiosity. He liked cartoons, toy cars, and cuddling with his mom during movie nights. Kia often called him her heart, and her world seemed to revolve around making sure he had the kind of life every child deserves. Eric Ashley Jr., Kia's boyfriend, had recently been released from prison after serving a 5-year sentence. While details about his past have not been widely shared, what's known is that Kia had maintained contact with him and they'd reunited. They were seen together in the weeks leading up to the tragedy, often in the same neighborhood where the crime would later take place. Echo Highlands is a residential area in Birmingham, fairly quiet, with homes tucked along tree-lined streets. In the early hours of July 12, Kia, Landon, and Eric were inside a parked car near an apartment complex. It was sometime around 3 a.m. when shots rang out, and within minutes, the lives of all three were gone. It would take months of careful investigation, but the case would eventually hinge on one remarkable detail, something Kia did in the final seconds of her life that would leave a permanent mark on the investigation. It was just after 3 a.m. on July 12, 2024, when residents of the Echo Highlands neighborhood were awakened by the sound of multiple gunshots. Police were called to the scene shortly after, an apartment complex on the 1000 block of 26th Avenue North in northeast Birmingham. When officers arrived, they found a horrifying scene. A car was parked along the curb, its windows shattered. Inside were 3 people, unresponsive, with multiple gunshot wounds. Arkia Berry was in the front passenger seat. Her 5-year-old son, Landon, sat behind her in the back. Eric Ashley Jr. was in the driver's seat. Paramedics were called immediately. Landon and Eric were pronounced dead at the scene. Arkia, still showing signs of life, was rushed to UAB hospital in critical condition. She would later die from her injuries. Before she passed, Arkia managed to send one final text message. A single word, Jocko. It was a name she had stored in her phone, a name investigators would come to focus on in the days ahead. Detectives moved quickly. They began by interviewing residents, checking nearby surveillance footage, and pulling data from cell phone towers in the area. What they found would build a clearer picture, not only of what happened that night, but of who was likely behind it. Neighbors reported hearing rapid gunfire. Some believed it sounded like at least a dozen shots. No one saw the shooter directly, but security cameras from nearby homes captured a vehicle speeding away from the scene just seconds after the gunfire stopped. That vehicle, a dark-colored SUV, was later found burned and abandoned in a remote area outside Birmingham. Investigators would soon link that vehicle to a man named Jacorian McGregor. With Arkia's dying text message and growing physical evidence, police were now focused on tracking down a suspect who appeared to be on the run. With the crime scene processed and the victims identified, Birmingham police turned their attention to the evidence. The most critical lead came from Arkia's phone. That single word, Jocko, became the focal point of the entire investigation. Detectives began combing through Arkia's phone records, social media messages, and texts. It didn't take long for them to connect Jocko to a man named Jacorian McGregor. He was 25 years old, known in the area, and had previous run-ins with law enforcement. They also analyzed the phones belonging to Eric and Landon. This allowed investigators to build a timeline, where the family had been that night, who they were in contact with, and what calls or messages were exchanged before the murders. But police didn't just rely on the text message. They were also reviewing surveillance footage from businesses and homes in the neighborhood. One of those cameras captured a dark SUV speeding away from the scene just after the gunfire was reported. The vehicle was later found burned out in a rural area, an attempt to destroy evidence. That SUV, a stolen vehicle, was linked to McGregor. Investigators discovered that he had been seen with the vehicle days before the shooting. Cell phone tower data placed his phone near the crime scene around the time of the murders. Despite the strong circumstantial evidence, McGregor wasn't immediately arrested. Police continued building their case for several months. In February of 2025, more than half a year after the killings, McGregor was finally taken into custody with help from the U.S. Marshal Service. He was arrested without incident and booked into the Jefferson County Jail. He's now facing multiple capital murder charges, one for each victim. As of this recording, McGregor is being held without bond. He's yet to stand trial, and prosecutors say they are pursuing the case with the full weight of the law. For the families of Arkia, Landon, and Eric, the arrest brought some answers, but no amount of justice can undo what was taken from them. Still, it was Arkia's final act, her last message, that gave investigators the lead they needed. And for many, that's a powerful reminder of the love she had for her son and the strength she showed, even in her final moments. The murder of Arkia Berry, her son Landon Brooks, and her boyfriend Eric Ashley Jr. sent shockwaves through the Birmingham community. But for those who knew them personally, the pain was immediate, and it ran deep. Arkia's family was devastated. Her mother, siblings, and extended relatives described her as the kind of person who would light up any room. She was known for her laugh, her loyalty to family, and the way she embraced motherhood. Kia didn't play about her baby, one cousin told reporters. She made sure Landon had everything he needed, even if it meant she had to go without. She was strong, but she had a soft heart. Landon's death shook people the most. 5 years old. A child just beginning his life. He was set to start kindergarten that fall. Family members say he was full of energy, talkative, and always curious. He loved dinosaurs, Spider-Man, and cereal at night, his grandmother shared during a vigil. He used to ask questions about everything. And he always wanted to be where his mom was. Arkia and Landon lived with her mother, and it was clear they were a close-knit family. On social media, Kia often posted photos of their everyday life, cooking dinner, watching cartoons, family gatherings. She wasn't famous. She wasn't wealthy. But she was real. And she mattered. For Eric Ashley Jr.'s family, the grief came with layers. Eric had a past, but he was trying to do better. Released from prison just months earlier, he was reconnecting with Arkia and spending time with her and Landon. He was said to be working toward a fresh start. He made mistakes, a family friend said, but he loved that woman, and he loved that little boy like his own. He was trying to do right. It wasn't supposed to end like this. At the vigil held just days after the killings, emotions ran high. Family members lit candles and released balloons into the sky. People cried, held one another, and spoke the names of the victims out loud. In the middle of it all stood a grieving mother, Arkia's mom, holding a photo of her daughter and grandson in one hand, and a candle in the other. "That was my baby and my grandbaby," she said through tears. "I don't know how I'm supposed to live without them. But I'm going to fight for justice. I owe them that." Local activists and violence prevention groups were quick to respond. Some organized marches. Others held panel discussions and community meetings. They stressed that this wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a reflection of a larger issue, the cycle of violence impacting young families, and the urgent need for change. Pastors, teachers, neighbors, they all spoke out. About the need for healing, for resources, for systems that protect families like Kia's before it's too late. "We shouldn't have to bury mothers and babies," one local pastor said. "We can't bring them back, but we can honor them by building a community where this doesn't happen again." The names Arkia, Landon, and Eric are now etched into the collective memory of Birmingham. Their story is a reminder of love, of family, and of how one moment can change everything. After months of investigation, surveillance review, and forensic analysis, authorities felt they had enough evidence to make an arrest. On February 9, 2025, nearly 7 months after the triple homicide, Jacorian McGregor was taken into custody. He was arrested by U.S. Marshals without incident and booked into the Jefferson County Jail. The charges were severe: 3 counts of capital murder, for the deaths of Arkia Berry, Landon Brooks, and Eric Ashley Jr. According to police, McGregor was identified early in the case through a combination of phone data, witness tips, and Arkia's final text message. Over time, investigators compiled what they believe is a clear connection between him, the stolen vehicle used in the crime, and his proximity to the victims on the night of the murders. Despite the evidence, McGregor has not yet entered a plea. Legal experts say the case is expected to go to trial, but the process could take months, or even years, depending on pretrial motions, evaluations, and the collection of further evidence. In the meantime, McGregor is being held without bond. Under Alabama law, capital murder charges can carry the possibility of life imprisonment or the death penalty if convicted. Prosecutors have not yet announced whether they will seek the death penalty in this case. The defense is expected to challenge the strength of the evidence, especially the reliance on digital data and the last-minute text message that named Jocko. But investigators have said there is more evidence tying McGregor to the crime than what's been made public so far. As the legal process unfolds, the families of the victims continue to seek justice. They've shown up in court, spoken with the media, and leaned on each other for strength. What they want most is accountability. "He took everything from us," one of Arkia's relatives said outside the courthouse. "I don't care how long it takes, we're not going anywhere until we get justice." Local advocacy groups are also following the case closely, using it to highlight broader concerns about domestic violence, gun access, and the protection of vulnerable families. For them, the trial represents more than just a verdict, it's about visibility and change. For now, the court dates are pending. The wheels of justice are turning slowly, but they are turning. And those affected by the tragedy are holding on to hope that accountability will come, and that Arkia, Landon, and Eric will not be forgotten. This case, like so many others, begins and ends with people. Real lives. Real families. A mother, a child, and a man trying to start over, all gone in an instant. What happened to Arkia, Landon, and Eric is more than just a crime story. It's a human tragedy. Arkia Berry was 32. She had dreams for herself and bigger ones for her son. By all accounts, she was a caring mother who put Landon first in everything. Her family says she was generous, protective, and funny, the kind of person who made others feel seen. Landon Brooks was only 5. He was learning his letters, just beginning to explore the world. His favorite shows, his favorite snacks, his favorite toy, all of it stopped that night. And in the aftermath, an entire community has been left asking why. Eric Ashley Jr. was trying to rebuild. His road hadn't been easy, but he was working to be present, for Arkia, and for Landon. Whether or not people understood their relationship, they were together that night. And they lost their lives together. The arrest of Jacorian McGregor may bring some sense of justice, but it doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't return birthdays, hugs, or late-night laughs. What it does do, though, is remind us of the importance of taking warning signs seriously, of protecting people when they're most vulnerable. As the legal process continues, so does the grief. And yet, so does the strength. Kia's family has remained outspoken, determined to keep her name, and Landon's, alive in the public eye. For them, justice isn't just a courtroom decision. It's about honoring their lives every single day. We tell these stories not to sensationalize, but to remember, to reflect, and to hopefully prevent another family from facing the same heartbreak. Story 3. In the heart of Toledo, Ohio, nestled between aging brick homes and cracked sidewalks, there once lived a 13-year-old girl named Kaimani Lateef. Her world, like many others her age, was shaped by school days, social media, inside jokes with friends, and quiet afternoons spent in her neighborhood. She wasn't famous. She wasn't a headline. She was simply a child, living her life in the space between youth and young adulthood. But on March 18, 2025, Kaimani disappeared. No witnesses. No alerts. No explanation. Just, gone. In the hours that followed, messages were exchanged between family members. Her phone went unanswered. Her usual routes, the park, her friend's house, the corner store, were checked and rechecked. And then came the moment every parent dreads, the realization that something was wrong. Not just delayed. Not just lost. Wrong. A missing person report was filed. Flyers were printed. Her name began to circulate through the community, on local news tickers, and in online posts. The questions began to echo louder than the answers. Where could she be? Who saw her last? Had she run away, or had something happened to her? As the hours turned into days, suspicion settled in. Not in the way one might expect, not directed at strangers or shadowy figures on dark streets. Instead, suspicion began to close in around the people closest to her. And one name, in particular, kept surfacing. Darnell Jones. He was her father. To those who knew them, their relationship was complicated. There were gaps, moments of closeness, but also distance. She didn't live with him full-time. Their time together was scattered. And yet, in the timeline of her disappearance, his role became impossible to ignore. 6 days after Kaimani vanished, police arrested Darnell Jones. The charge, abduction. No one was prepared for what would follow next. The city had hoped she was still alive. They had hoped there would be an explanation. A misunderstanding. A safe return. But on March 24th, that hope was extinguished. Her body was found inside a long-abandoned house on Miami Street. What authorities uncovered inside that house would stop even seasoned investigators cold. In the hours and days that followed, the truth began to take shape, through autopsy reports, confession transcripts, and pieces of digital evidence that, once assembled, revealed a timeline more horrifying than anyone expected. This is not just the story of a crime. It's the story of a child who never got the chance to grow up. A story of trust fractured at its core. And a story of a community left stunned, searching for meaning in the unthinkable. This is the case of Keimani Lateeg. Before the news reports. Before the court filings. Before her name became a symbol of tragedy. Keimani Lateeg was just a girl. Born in 2011, she was 13 years old when she vanished. Just a few months shy of finishing the 7th grade. She lived in Toledo, Ohio, a city of contradictions. A place where some blocks are lined with trees and laughter, and others, with silence and broken windows. But in her corner of the city, Keimani found her rhythm. Her world was filled with little rituals, the way she styled her hair, the music she listened to on the walk to school, the way she laughed too hard at her own jokes. Her teachers remember her as bright. Curious. Not the loudest in the room, but not invisible either. She had a certain presence, a calm kind of confidence. The kind that made people listen when she spoke. She was thoughtful. Observant. Some would say, wise beyond her years. Friends say she was the type who could keep a secret, but also the one who would tell you the truth even when it stung a little. She had a sharp sense of humor, a surprisingly quick wit, and a heart that held on to people tightly. Once she cared about you, she didn't let go easily. She liked TikTok, texting her cousins, and drawing. There was always a notebook somewhere nearby, half filled with sketches, half filled with things she was too shy to say out loud. Her phone was her world, like so many her age. And in that world, she created space for herself, space to be silly, space to vent, space to feel understood. But even in that bubble, there were signs of pressure. Her home life, according to those who knew her, wasn't always steady. She didn't live with her father, Darnell Jones. Custody arrangements, visitation rights, all of it formed a pattern of partial connection. He was in and out of her orbit. Sometimes consistent. Sometimes not. But despite any conflict behind the scenes, she still gave people chances. Even when she was disappointed. Even when she had every reason to pull away. It's something her aunt once said, Keimani had a hard time walking away from people she loved, even when they hurt her. There are no perfect portraits of a child. No single story that explains every decision they make. But for Keimani, the picture that emerges is clear. She was a girl trying to find her place in the world, holding on to love wherever she could find it. And in those final weeks before her disappearance, she seemed, to most, like she was okay. There were no public warning signs. No alarms. Just the quiet rhythm of everyday life. School. Home. Friends. Messages sent. Plans made. Then, one day, silence. No one could have imagined what she would go through. No one could have imagined who would be responsible. But in order to understand the weight of what happened, we have to hold on to who she was. Not just a name. Not just a case file. But a girl, full of potential, full of life, full of all the things she would never get to become. She was Keimani. And she mattered. Tuesday, March 18, 2025. The kind of day that disappears into memory without fanfare. No storms. No headlines. Nothing to mark it as different, until everything changed. Sometime that afternoon, Keimani Lateeg was picked up by her father, Darnell Jones. A simple visit. Nothing out of the ordinary. At least, that's what her family thought. She was expected back later that day. But night came, and she didn't return. At first, it was easy to believe she just lost track of time. That maybe her phone had died, or she'd decided to stay over unexpectedly. But as the hours passed, that explanation began to fall apart. Calls went unanswered. Messages unread. Her social media activity, silent. By that evening, the family was worried. By morning, they were afraid. On March 19th, she was officially reported missing to the Toledo Police Department. The initial response was procedural. Officers gathered details, checked possible locations, retraced her last known steps. Standard protocol. But early on, something didn't sit right. There were no sightings. No friends had heard from her. Her phone, which had once pinged off local towers, had gone completely offline. Police searched nearby parks, bus stops, abandoned lots. Nothing. And when they began asking more pointed questions, attention quickly turned to the last person seen with Keimani, her father. Darnell Jones initially told investigators he hadn't seen her that day. That she never came to him. But then, his story changed. He admitted to picking her up. Said they spent time together. Then he changed his account again. Details shifted. Timelines blurred. To detectives, these weren't just inconsistencies. They were red flags. They began looking deeper. Into his history. His past encounters with law enforcement. There were no active warrants. No serious convictions. But there were patterns. Prior disputes involving family. Allegations that never made it far. Small things, but enough to raise concern now that Keimani was missing. On social media, her face was everywhere. Shared hundreds of times. The same photo, smiling, youthful, unaware of the storm now attached to her name. Community groups lit up with posts. People canvassed neighborhoods. But still, no trace of her. The hope was that she had run away. That she'd come back on her own. That this was a misunderstanding. But investigators weren't waiting. On Sunday, March 23rd, 5 days after she vanished, Darnell Jones was arrested and charged with abduction. It was a turning point in the case. Still, there were questions. With no body, and no confession, it wasn't clear what had happened. But police were certain, Keimani had been with him. And now, she was gone. At the time of his arrest, Darnell said nothing. No explanation. No denial. Just silence. Meanwhile, investigators followed what few leads they had, digital breadcrumbs, surveillance footage, and one particular tip that would change everything. Late on the afternoon of March 24th, a patrol car was dispatched to a long-abandoned house on Miami Street. It was a boarded-up structure, one of many in the area. There were no recent utility records. No neighbors who'd noticed movement. But something drew them there. Inside, they found her. Keimani was discovered in a back room. Lifeless. Alone. Covered in a blanket. The house was cold. Empty. There were no signs of a struggle. No screams reported by neighbors. No forced entry. It was a place people had forgotten. Except someone hadn't. The news hit the community hard. The missing posters were now memorials. The theories stopped. There would be no safe return. No miracle ending. What remained were questions. Not just how it happened. But why? Why a father, her father, would bring harm to the child who had trusted him. The discovery at the Miami Street house marked the end of the search, and the beginning of a deeper investigation. Keimani's body would speak in ways no witness could. Through autopsy reports. Through forensic detail. Through silence that said more than words ever could. This was no longer a missing persons case. It was a homicide. The day after Keimani Lateed was found, the nature of the investigation changed. This was no longer about finding a missing child. It became about justice. By the time officers located her body, Darnell Jones was already behind bars, charged with abduction. At that point, it was a preventative measure. He was the last person seen with her. He wasn't cooperating. And there were gaps in his story no one could explain. But now, with the crime scene confirmed, prosecutors needed more than suspicion. The house on Miami Street had no electricity. No working plumbing. It had been abandoned for years. But according to court documents, that location was known to Darnell. He'd grown up in the area. He knew which houses were empty, which ones people avoided. In the early hours of questioning, Darnell said little. At times, he claimed ignorance. At other times, confusion. He couldn't explain what happened after he picked Kaimani up. He couldn't say where they'd gone, or why he didn't return her. When pressed, he deflected. When asked to account for his time, he hesitated. What he didn't know, or didn't acknowledge, was that police had already begun collecting digital evidence. Surveillance footage. Cell tower pings. GPS data. Small pieces of a timeline that, when assembled, began to point in a single direction. They traced his phone's location history. On the evening of March 18th, the day Kaimani disappeared, his device showed movement toward the 500 block of Miami Street. It remained in that area for over an hour. And then, silence. Kaimani's phone stopped transmitting shortly before that visit. Her digital footprint disappeared entirely. No more texts. No more messages. Nothing. For investigators, it wasn't just coincidence. They obtained a warrant to search Darnell's vehicle. Forensic teams combed it for evidence. They recovered fibers. Biological material. It would take time for lab results. But even without the final tests, the circumstantial case was growing. Still, questions remained. Why there? Why her? According to family, the relationship between Darnell and Kaimani had always been strained. He hadn't been a consistent figure in her life. Custody arrangements were complicated. Visitation wasn't regular. But in the weeks leading up to her death, something changed. Some in the family believed he was trying to rebuild a connection, reaching out more, offering to spend time with her. Kaimani, known for being forgiving, agreed. Maybe she hoped things would be different. Maybe she wanted to believe in second chances. But something during that visit went wrong. Prosecutors believed Darnell picked her up with the intention of harming her. Whether it was premeditated or the result of an argument that escalated, they may never know. What they did know was this: no one else had seen her after she left with him. And he couldn't, or wouldn't, explain why. In the weeks following her death, prosecutors upgraded the charges. From abduction, to aggravated murder. Darnell Jones was formally indicted on multiple counts, including tampering with evidence and abuse of a corpse. His bond was set at $2 million. He entered a plea of not guilty. To the public, he said nothing. No statement. No apology. No explanation. For the family, it was a second loss. They had already buried Kaimani. Now they were forced to face the possibility that the person responsible was someone she had once trusted. The case was far from over. Trial dates were being set. Evidence still processed. But for many watching, the story had already left a scar. Because when someone disappears, it leaves a silence. When a child disappears, it leaves a silence that never quite goes away. The house on Miami Street had been forgotten by the city for years. A crumbling, vacant shell. No lights. No purpose. Just another abandoned structure in a neighborhood full of them. But for 1 week in March, it became something else, the center of a city's grief. After Kaimani Latigue's body was found inside, the home was sealed off with crime scene tape. Forensic teams came and went. Reporters hovered nearby. Locals gathered quietly at the curb. No one needed directions, they all knew where the house was now. Flowers and candles began appearing outside. Handwritten notes. Stuffed animals. Her school photo, taped to a telephone pole across the street. In the middle of the crowd, her mother. Her siblings. Classmates. People who didn't know her at all, but felt the loss like it was their own. Keimani's name became a symbol. Not just of tragedy, but of anger. Of a city that had already seen too many children taken too soon. Too many headlines that started the same way, and ended with silence. There were vigils. Marches. A memorial service streamed online. Community organizers called for changes, in the way runaway cases were handled, in how family court operated, in how vulnerable children were protected. But even in mourning, there was tension. People wanted answers. And some wanted accountability for more than just the man in custody. On April 17th, just under a month after Keimani was found, the house on Miami Street caught fire. It was after midnight. No one inside. No electricity. No reason. By the time firefighters arrived, flames had already eaten through most of the structure. The back wall collapsed. The roof caved in. What little evidence remained was gone. The fire was labeled suspicious. Investigators began working to determine the cause, whether it was intentional, accidental, or something in between. No official ruling has been made public. But in the days that followed, a question echoed throughout Toledo: was someone trying to destroy something? The house was no longer just a crime scene. It had become a symbol, and for some, a source of pain too heavy to bear. Whether the fire was meant to erase evidence or erase memory, no one could say for sure. The family called it a second loss. A place where their daughter had taken her last breath, now reduced to ash. Local leaders urged calm. The police promised transparency. But in quiet corners of the community, theories spread. About who started the fire. About why. About whether justice could ever really come after something like this. The legal system moved slowly. Darnell Jones remained in custody. The investigation continued. Autopsy reports were finalized. Evidence was catalogued. Charges adjusted. But for Keimani's family, no indictment could fill the empty chair at dinner. No court date could rewind time. In interviews, her mother struggled for words. She said the hardest part wasn't the loss, it was the waiting. The waiting for truth. For justice. For the world to understand who Keimani was before this. Because in every story like this, the victim risks being swallowed by the crime. Reduced to a file number. A case name. A tragic headline. But Keimani Lateed was more than that. A 7th grader. A sister. A daughter. She liked making TikToks. She loved music. She wanted to be a nurse. She had a future. She had time. Until someone took it from her. As spring moved through Ohio, the memory of Keimani's death didn't fade. It settled over the city like a weight. A child gone. A father charged. A house destroyed by fire. But inside the Lucas County Courthouse, the work was just beginning. Prosecutors had a name. They had a body. And they had a suspect in custody. But what they needed now was proof. Something more than suspicion. More than an incomplete timeline. They needed to build a case strong enough to hold in court. A case that could explain what happened, and why. It began with the data. The forensic evidence gathered from Darnell Jones' vehicle showed trace biological material. Investigators believed it matched Keimani's DNA. But they needed confirmation. Lab results were pending. Processing delays, a familiar frustration, added time. There was also the timeline, and the phone data that filled it in. Darnell's phone pinged off a tower near the abandoned house on Miami Street during a window of time where Keimani was believed to have still been alive. Her phone went dark shortly after. That window, just over an hour, became central to the case. There were no eyewitnesses. No confession. But prosecutors believed they didn't need one. They had motive, opportunity, and a digital trail that grew more compelling with each passing day. Then came the autopsy. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as homicidal violence. The details were not made public. But the language was deliberate. There was no suggestion that Keimani died by accident. No mention of overdose. No evidence she had harmed herself. She had been placed under a blanket, a detail that, in court, could signal concealment. Or remorse. Or both. Investigators also learned that Darnell had allegedly made comments to others in the weeks before Keimani's disappearance. They were vague. Possibly threatening. But enough to be mentioned in affidavits. Enough to suggest premeditation, even if loosely. Defense attorneys pushed back. They questioned the timeline. They challenged the reliability of the phone data. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial. That there was no direct proof, only inferences, and assumptions. Darnell Jones maintained his plea, not guilty. At a preliminary hearing, prosecutors laid out the basic outline of their case. The judge ruled that it was sufficient to move forward. Trial dates were tentatively scheduled. And Darnell's bond was held at $2 million. For the family, the legal process was agonizing. Each motion, each filing, another reminder. And still, they waited for a full picture. There were also community voices. Some believed more should be done. Others wanted to understand how a known vacant property had gone unnoticed, why no one saw anything. Or said anything. In a city already exhausted by unsolved violence, this case struck a nerve. It wasn't just that Keimani was gone. It was how quickly it had all happened. How she seemed to vanish, and how close the answer had been all along. By May, the prosecution's case was gaining momentum. More witnesses were contacted. Crime scene photos reviewed. Phone records subpoenaed. The fire at the house, still under investigation, remained a lingering shadow over everything. Though authorities hadn't confirmed arson, few believed the timing was coincidental. And if someone had burned the house intentionally, it begged a darker question: who else knew what happened that night? The pressure on prosecutors was heavy. But for Keimani's family, the weight was heavier. Justice felt distant. Cold. Legal. It moved in motions and dates, not feelings. And while the world moved forward, they remained frozen in the moment she disappeared. The case was still far from trial. No plea deal had been offered. No confessions had surfaced. And so, the questions continued. Why did he pick her up that day? What happened in the hours after? Why that house? And why, her? Questions that may only ever be answered in a courtroom. Or not at all. By April, spring had settled over Toledo. The days were longer. The trees had started to bloom again. But for one family, for one school, for one neighborhood, time didn't move the same way. There's something about the loss of a child that disturbs the rhythm of the world around it. The silence that follows doesn't fade with headlines, or press conferences, or even justice. It settles in, quietly. Permanently. And yet, Keimani's name stayed. In the weeks after her death, people who had never met her began to carry her name with them. It showed up in Facebook posts, on posters stapled to telephone poles, on school walls scribbled in marker, "Rest in power, Keimani." Teachers remembered her energy. Her friends remembered her laugh. Her mother remembered the little things, how she liked to wear her hair, the songs she would sing under her breath, the way she called out, "Mama," when she needed something. Keimani had dreams. She wanted to be a nurse. She liked helping people, even when she barely knew them. That's what her mom said. She was good at making friends, and terrible at holding grudges. She had just turned 13. There should have been more birthdays. More plans. More ordinary, beautiful years of growing up. Instead, there was grief. And questions. But grief often gives way to action. In the community, her name became a rallying cry. Local activists began organizing safety patrols near abandoned homes. Neighborhood leaders met with city council. They demanded updated registries of vacant properties, a system to prevent another child from disappearing into a place no one watched. At Keimani's school, counselors worked with students to process their loss. Teachers built small memorials in their classrooms. One corner was filled with photos, notes, and drawings from classmates, colorful hearts with her name scribbled in the middle. "I miss you, Keimani. I hope you're up there dancing." Even local organizations took notice. Missing child protocols were reviewed. Training was discussed. Some began asking harder questions about how these cases are prioritized, especially for black children. Why alerts are delayed? Why certain cases receive less attention? Why some lives are heard, and others are overlooked? In life, Keimani was loved by those who knew her. In death, she became a symbol for those who didn't. Her name appeared in city meetings. On t-shirts. In prayers. Her image, her school photo, smiling just slightly, became something many carried with them. Her family worked hard to remind the world she was more than a headline. They spoke when they could. They showed up even when it hurt. They held each other together. In a world quick to move on, they held still. They remembered. And in doing so, they reminded others of the quiet cost of violence. Of what's lost when a child disappears. Of what it means when justice moves slowly, or sometimes, never at all. Keimani's legacy is still being written. In the courtrooms. In city halls. In classrooms where her friends still sit. In the hearts of her siblings, who still talk about her in the present tense. There's no neat ending to a story like this. No ribbon, no closure. But there is memory. And there is truth. And maybe, if anything good can grow from a moment like this, it's the refusal to forget. The refusal to stop saying her name. Keimani Lateef. As the trial of Darnell Jones looms, the community of Toledo grapples with a cascade of questions that extend beyond the courtroom. Why did a father commit such a heinous act against his own child? What signs were missed, and could this tragedy have been prevented? Court documents reveal that Jones admitted to killing Keimani at the vacant home on Miami Street. The Lucas County Coroner's Office determined her cause of death as multiple incised wounds of the neck, indicating a brutal assault. Yet, the motive remains elusive. Jones's inconsistent statements and the lack of clear reasoning leave a void that the legal proceedings have yet to fill. The fire that engulfed the crime scene on April 19, just a day after Jones's court appearance, adds another layer of complexity. Authorities suspect arson, but no official cause has been confirmed. Was this an attempt to destroy evidence, or a manifestation of community anguish? The timing raises suspicions, but answers remain scarce. Lucas County Children's Services reported receiving 3 concerns about Keimani's welfare between December 2023 and March 2024. However, they found no evidence warranting her removal from the home. This revelation prompts a critical examination of the child welfare system's protocols and responsiveness. The community's response has been a mix of mourning and mobilization. Vigils were held, and discussions about systemic reforms intensified. Activists and citizens alike demand a thorough review of procedures to prevent such tragedies from recurring. As the legal process unfolds, the focus remains on seeking justice for Keimani. The charges against Jones include murder, abduction, and felonious assault, with his bond set at $4 million. Yet, the broader quest is for systemic change, ensuring that no other child falls through the cracks. Keimani Latigue's story is a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities within our communities and the imperative for vigilance, compassion, and reform. Her legacy compels us to ask difficult questions and to strive for a society where every child is protected and valued. Story 4. In February 2025, 16-year-old Miranda Corsett was reported missing in Gulfport, Florida. Her grandmother, who was her legal guardian, contacted the authorities on February 24 after Miranda failed to return home. Miranda, a young mother to an 11-month-old child, had connected with 35-year-old Stephen Gress through a dating app. She visited Gress's residence on February 14 and returned the following day. According to law enforcement, Miranda was held captive at Gress's home for approximately a week. During this time, she was subjected to repeated physical abuse. Gress accused her of stealing a ring, a claim that was later disputed. Disturbingly, Gress sent photographs of Miranda's deteriorating condition to two acquaintances and his mother, Jacqueline Christic. These images depicted severe bruising and swelling. Despite receiving these photos, none of the recipients contacted the authorities. Gress later confessed that his girlfriend, Michelle Brandis, killed Miranda by suffocating her with a pool ball and plastic wrap. Following Miranda's death, Gress and Brandis dismembered her body and disposed of it in a dumpster. They then went out to celebrate Brandis's birthday. Both Gress and Brandis have been charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Christic admitted to receiving messages from her son but claimed she did not view the images and failed to alert law enforcement. As of now, no charges have been filed against the individuals who received the images but did not report them. This case raises profound questions about accountability and the responsibilities of those who are privy to such information. It challenges us to consider the consequences of inaction in the face of evident suffering. In this documentary, we will delve into the details of Miranda Corsett's case, examining the events that led to her untimely death and the subsequent legal proceedings. Miranda Corsett was just 16 years old when she was reported missing. She was more than a headline. More than a crime statistic. Miranda was a daughter. A granddaughter. A young mother. She had recently given birth to her first child, a baby not yet a year old. Miranda was doing what so many young mothers do, trying to figure out how to balance life, responsibility, and her own youth. She lived with her grandmother in Gulfport, Florida, who was also her legal guardian. According to police records, Miranda had been placed under her grandmother's care in 2018, when she was around 10 years old. That transition marked a turning point in her upbringing, one that may have reflected deeper family issues, but also a relationship with her grandmother that was structured and protective. Like many teens her age, Miranda was active on social media. She used dating apps, chatted with new people, made friends easily. But the combination of independence and digital access sometimes exposes young people to risks they can't fully recognize. The man who would later be accused of kidnapping and murdering her, Stephen Gress, was 35 years old. More than twice her age. According to reports, Miranda had met Gress on a dating app. Their first known interaction occurred in mid-February. She had visited his home once before without incident, on February 14, Valentine's Day, and had returned home safely the next morning. But when she went back a few days later, she never came home again. What Miranda may not have known is that Stephen Gress had a disturbing criminal history. He had previously served time for charges involving sexual battery and the possession of child pornography. His probation ended just 2 months before Miranda disappeared. It's not known whether Miranda had any idea about his past. She might have seen only what he wanted her to see, a man who seemed to listen, who paid attention, who treated her like an adult. But the truth was far more dangerous. Miranda was trying to navigate young motherhood and adolescence at the same time. She was still figuring out who she was. Her social circle, her online presence, and her personal decisions were all part of that journey. She was vulnerable in a way that many young girls are, searching for connection, for autonomy, for something that felt like freedom. Her grandmother reported her missing on February 24. By then, Miranda had already been gone for days. The exact day Miranda Corsett first made contact with Stephen Gress isn't publicly documented. But what we do know is this: their connection started online. Miranda, like many teenagers, used dating apps. And Stephen Gress, a 35-year-old man, was on them too. Despite the wide age gap, he managed to initiate a conversation with a 16-year-old girl, likely through platforms that don't rigorously verify age or monitor interactions. Gress, who lived in St. Petersburg, Florida, had a criminal record. He had previously served time for sexual battery and had been convicted on charges related to child pornography. He was released from supervision just 2 months before this contact with Miranda took place. His digital trail reveals a man with a history of predatory behavior, someone who knew how to approach, how to manipulate, and how to hide behind screens. Their first known meeting occurred on Valentine's Day, 2024. Miranda traveled to Gress's home in St. Petersburg. She stayed the night. The next morning, she returned home. Her family, including her grandmother, may have been unaware of where she had gone. There's no indication in police reports that Miranda disclosed the identity of the man she visited. And like many teenagers, she may have believed she could handle herself. That nothing bad would happen. That it was just one night. But when she returned to Gress's home days later, this time on February 18th, something changed. What she may have believed would be a short visit became something else entirely. Gress later claimed that Miranda had stolen a ring from him. Whether that accusation was real, imagined, or manufactured as a pretext for what followed, is something only Gress knows. But it would be the reason he gave for keeping her inside the house, refusing to let her leave. Over the next 6 days, Miranda was held against her will. According to what Gress told police during his eventual confession, he kept her locked in a bedroom. She was not allowed to leave. The room became her prison. There was no escape. No one to call. No one who knew she was there. And outside that bedroom door, just beyond reach, was Gress, and his girlfriend, Michelle Brandis. Miranda's story, already marked by hardship, had now crossed an invisible threshold. One that led her further and further away from safety. And deeper into the hands of someone who saw her not as a human being, not as a child, not as a mother, but as something he could control. The door was shut. And for 6 days, it stayed shut. Behind that door, in a back bedroom of a single-story home in St. Petersburg, Florida, Miranda Corsett, just 16 years old, was trapped. There were no neighbors knocking. No police at the door. No sounds of help arriving. According to sworn statements and a full confession later given to police, Miranda was not free to leave. She was being held. And each hour that passed inside that room pushed her further away from safety. Stephen Gress, the man who invited Miranda into his home after meeting her online, claimed that she had stolen a ring. That accusation, however baseless or imagined, became the justification for everything that followed. But what happened inside that home wasn't about theft. It was about power. Gress locked Miranda in the bedroom. He restricted her movement, denied her food, and began a cycle of abuse that escalated with time. The house was not isolated in a rural area. It sat on a residential street. A quiet neighborhood, surrounded by families and retirees. But inside, the violence was silent. Contained. Gress began physically assaulting Miranda. He later told detectives that he struck her with a belt. That he restrained her. That he kept her naked so she wouldn't try to run. At no point did he allow her access to a phone. She was completely cut off. His girlfriend, 34-year-old Michelle Brandis, was also in the house. And according to the state's case, she knew exactly what was happening. Miranda asked them both for help. She begged them to let her go. But no help came. The abuse wasn't just physical, it was documented. Gress took photographs of Miranda. These weren't casual images. They were intended to show what he had done. One photo, as later described in police reports, showed Miranda's face severely swollen. Her eyes almost swollen shut. Her mouth bloodied. Her body marked with bruises. Gress didn't keep those photos to himself. He sent them to 2 friends. And to his mother. Her name was Jacqueline Christic. According to her own account, Gress sent her a series of text messages. In those texts, he described how Miranda had been beat, that she could barely move. He sent images along with those messages. Christic would later tell investigators that she never opened the images. That she didn't believe what he was saying was real. But even without seeing the pictures, she never called 911. Never asked for a welfare check. Never told anyone what her son had sent. Neither did the 2 friends who received the same photos. All of them remained silent. During this time, Miranda was still alive. Still inside the house. Still enduring what police would later describe as torture. There are indications that Miranda began to lose her strength. Gress himself told officers that she was barely responsive in the final days. He said he thought about calling for help, but never did. Instead, he left her in the room. Kept the door closed. The lights in the house stayed on. Music played. Food was ordered. A 16-year-old girl was dying in the next room, and life continued around her as if she wasn't there. The final stages of Miranda's captivity were marked by her physical decline. Gress claimed he brought her water. Sometimes food. But her body told a different story. When investigators later recovered her remains, the autopsy would show bruising across her entire body. Broken ribs. Facial fractures. Injuries consistent with prolonged, repeated blunt force trauma. At some point, her ability to speak faded. And then, she went silent altogether. Michelle Brandis would later admit to her role in Miranda's death. She told police that she was the one who ended Miranda's life. And what she described was not a moment of panic or a loss of control. It was methodical. She said she placed a pool ball in a sock, pressed it against Miranda's mouth, and wrapped plastic wrap over her head. She held it there until Miranda stopped breathing. Stephen Gress, the man who had started the abuse, stood nearby. When it was over, they didn't panic. They didn't flee. They didn't call the police. They got rid of her body. And then, they went out. Played mini-golf. Ate fast food. As if Miranda Corset had never existed. The photos Stephen Gress took of Miranda Corset were never meant to help her. They weren't used to report a crime. They weren't sent as cries for help. They were sent to people who already knew Gress, and said nothing. The first was his mother. Jacqueline Christic. According to a criminal complaint filed after Miranda's death, Gress sent Christic several text messages during the days Miranda was being held. In one message, he admitted Miranda was being beaten. In another, he told her Miranda was injured so badly she could barely move. And he attached images, photos of Miranda's face, bruised and swollen. Christic later claimed she didn't open the images. She said she thought her son was making things up. But she never contacted the police. She never asked for a welfare check. Instead, she deleted the messages. The same pattern repeated with 2 of Gress's friends. They, too, received photos of Miranda. Images showing clear evidence of abuse. Injuries that no one could mistake for anything else. And just like Gress's mother, they said nothing. Investigators later seized the devices involved. They recovered the messages. They reviewed the content. They saw what the recipients had seen. None of it had been reported. Gress's own texts read like a slow confession, sent in real time as Miranda's condition deteriorated. But the people on the other end of those messages didn't act. This detail, the sharing of evidence without consequence, became a central focus in the case. Authorities would later ask, if any one of those people had spoken up, would Miranda still be alive? It was a chilling question. One that prosecutors wouldn't ignore. In the months after Miranda's murder, Jacqueline Christic was arrested and charged with failure to report child abuse. She was booked into jail in Pinellas County. She wasn't the one who laid hands on Miranda, but prosecutors made clear, silence has consequences. The law in Florida requires anyone who witnesses, suspects, or receives credible evidence of child abuse, to report it. Not to think about it. Not to delete it. Not to ignore it. Report it. And Christic didn't. Investigators found that all 3 recipients of Gressa's messages had failed Miranda. They had been given a glimpse into something unthinkable, and instead of intervening, they looked away. And while Miranda remained locked in that room, her condition worsening by the hour, her abuser documented it, preserved it, and no one did a thing. That silence didn't just allow the abuse to continue. It allowed it to escalate, unchecked, uninterrupted, and unreported, until Miranda was dead. On the 6th day of captivity, Miranda Corsett was still alive. Barely. According to police, she was too weak to stand. Her face was swollen from repeated blows. Her ribs were fractured. Her body bore the marks of prolonged physical trauma. And yet, she was still breathing. But not for much longer. On February 23, 2024, Stephen Gress and Michelle Brandis made a decision. One that would end Miranda's life. Gress later claimed he was in the room. He said Brandis was the one who did it. She took a pool ball, something small, heavy, and round, and slipped it into a sock. Then, she placed it in Miranda's mouth. She wrapped plastic around Miranda's head. According to the police report, Brandis held it there until Miranda stopped moving. Until the struggling stopped. Until she was gone. There was no panic afterward. No frantic call for help. No remorse. Gress and Brandis didn't bury the body. They didn't try to cover their tracks. Instead, they wrapped Miranda's remains in a bedsheet. They placed her in the back of Gressa's pickup truck. And then, they went on with their day. They stopped for fast food. They played mini-golf. Surveillance cameras at a local putt-putt course captured them smiling, laughing, playing as if nothing had happened. As if the lifeless body of a 16-year-old girl wasn't lying just feet away in the parking lot. As if they hadn't just participated in one of the most horrifying acts imaginable. When the sun began to set, they drove out to an area off Buckeye Road in Palmetto, Florida, a remote stretch of land surrounded by trees and brush. It was dark, rural, far from the neighborhoods and subdivisions of St. Petersburg. There, under cover of night, they dumped Miranda's body. Left her there, in the woods. And drove away. Miranda Corsett was gone. No missing persons report had yet been filed. No one was looking for her. She was 16 years old. A mother. A daughter. A granddaughter. And for the moment, no one even knew she was missing. On February 24, 2024, one day after Miranda Corsett was murdered, her body was found. A passerby, walking along Buckeye Road in Palmetto, spotted something wrapped in a bedsheet, lying near the tree line. When deputies arrived, they found the remains of a teenage girl. The scene was disturbing. Miranda had been left like garbage. Abandoned in a rural patch of woods, far from her home. She had no ID on her. No phone. No personal items that might explain who she was or how she got there. But it didn't take long. Fingerprints, dental records, and missing persons reports all helped narrow the search. Within 48 hours, Miranda Corsett had a name. And investigators had questions. St. Petersburg police began tracing Miranda's final movements. It led them to her social media, her phone records, and eventually, to 25-year-old Stephen Gress. They discovered she had been communicating with him for several weeks prior to her death. The connection was clear. On February 26, just 2 days after Miranda was found, Gress and his girlfriend Michelle Brandis were arrested. Both were charged with murder. And within hours, Gress began to talk. During his interview with police, Gress confessed to nearly everything. He admitted that Miranda had been staying at his home. That she'd been locked in a bedroom. That she'd been abused, hit, restrained, denied food and water. He said she was being punished for allegedly stealing a ring. When detectives asked why he hadn't sought help as Miranda's condition deteriorated, he had no answer. He claimed he considered calling 911. But never did. Instead, he admitted to documenting her injuries. He admitted to sending photos to his mother and friends. And he admitted that, when she died, he helped dispose of her body. The same man who had just confessed to holding a teenage girl captive and watching her die, now sat calmly across from detectives, answering questions as if recounting a routine. He pointed to Brandis as the one who delivered the final blow. But he acknowledged his role. He said he was present. That he helped cover her face. That he watched as Miranda's life ended. And then, he left her in the woods. Brandis would later confirm many of the same details. But she claimed Gress was the driving force. That she had followed his lead. Still, her words didn't change the facts. Together, they had held Miranda captive. Together, they had kept her locked away for 6 days. And together, they had ended her life. The confession gave investigators a roadmap. And what they found, text messages, photos, timelines, and witness interviews, lined up almost exactly with what Gress had said. The horror Miranda endured was not in dispute. And neither was the truth of who had caused it. Jacqueline Christic was not in the room when Miranda Corset was killed. She wasn't there when the belt was raised, when the bruises formed, when the air left Miranda's lungs. But her phone was. And so were the messages. At some point during Miranda's captivity, her son, Stephen Gress, sent his mother a series of texts. In those messages, he described what was happening. He said the girl had been beaten. That she was hurt. That she could barely move. And he sent pictures. Not one. Several. Images of Miranda, bruised, swollen, broken. There was no ambiguity. No room for misunderstanding. The girl in those images was injured, clearly and severely. The texts were preserved. Christic later told police she didn't believe what she was seeing. That she assumed her son was exaggerating. She admitted she never opened the photos. She claimed she didn't think it was real. But she also didn't ask questions. She didn't respond with concern. She didn't call for help. She didn't report it. She deleted the messages, and went on with her life. The law in Florida doesn't allow for that kind of silence. When a person has reasonable cause to suspect a child is being abused or neglected, they are legally obligated to report it. Especially when that abuse is spelled out in writing. Especially when it comes with images. And especially when that child doesn't survive. Jacqueline Christic was arrested and charged with failure to report child abuse. She was taken into custody and booked into the Pinellas County Jail. The charge is a third-degree felony. It may not carry the same weight as murder, but it speaks to something larger. That silence is not neutral. That choosing not to act is, itself, a choice. And that in this case, doing nothing may have helped cost a 16-year-old girl her life. Miranda had no one to speak for her in those final days. She begged for help. Gress's own confession confirmed it. She asked to leave. She asked to go home. And at least one person outside that house had the opportunity to make that happen. But she didn't. And now, her role, however passive, however distant, is written into the case that followed. After Miranda Corset's body was found, the investigation moved swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming. Digital messages. Photos. The recorded interviews. And most damning of all, confessions from both Stephen Gress and Michelle Brandis. On February 26, 2024, both were arrested. They were booked into the Pinellas County Jail. Gress was charged with first-degree murder, false imprisonment, and abuse of a dead human body. Brandis faced similar charges, including first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. Prosecutors stated that Miranda's death was not a crime of passion. Not a sudden act of violence. But a pattern. A series of choices. And a sustained, deliberate course of abuse that ended in murder. Under Florida law, first-degree murder is punishable by life in prison, or the death penalty. Prosecutors have not announced publicly whether they will seek capital punishment. But they've made clear. This case will be tried with the full weight of the law. In charging documents, the state laid out the timeline. 6 days of captivity. A death by asphyxiation. A disposal meant to cover it all up. And through it all, photos, texts, and witnesses who watched from the outside. The prosecution has indicated they will use Gress's own words against him. His confession. His messages. His attempt to document what he was doing in real time, without ever lifting a finger to stop it. The evidence will not be circumstantial. It will be visual. It will be direct. And it will be horrifying. As for Michelle Brandis, she has not yet entered a plea. But investigators say her role in Miranda's final moments was just as active. The sock. The plastic wrap. The intent to silence. All of it, they say, points to murder. And the courts will decide. Meanwhile, Jacqueline Christic, Gress's mother, has been charged with failure to report child abuse, a third-degree felony. She has not been charged with direct involvement in Miranda's death. But her case has reignited public debate about responsibility, and about how the law should respond when warning signs are ignored. All 3 defendants are awaiting trial. Their hearings have been delayed several times. But when those trials begin, each of them will face the consequences of what they did. Or what they failed to do. And in every courtroom, one name will be repeated again and again. Miranda Corsett. A teenager. A mother. A daughter. And a victim whose final days are now part of a case that has shaken an entire community. The news of Miranda Corsett's death moved quickly. From the crime scene in Palmetto, through courtrooms in Pinellas County, and into headlines across Florida. People didn't just read about what happened. They saw it. Her photos. Her age. The messages. The cruelty. And what followed was something heavier than outrage. It was grief. Miranda wasn't just a teenage girl from St. Petersburg. She was a mother. Her 1-year-old daughter now left behind. A life cut short. And a story that forced people to ask questions they weren't ready to answer. How does a 16-year-old vanish for nearly a week, without anyone noticing? How does a mother receive photos of a child in pain, and choose silence? How many chances were missed to save her? In the days that followed the arrest, the community responded. Candlelight vigils were held in St. Pete. Local residents gathered in parks and churches, speaking Miranda's name aloud, because for too long, no one had. Her grandmother posted messages online, begging the world not to forget her. Friends and classmates shared photos, videos, stories of a girl who had dreams beyond the neighborhood, who wanted more than the life she was trapped in. And slowly, the narrative began to shift. Miranda wasn't just the victim in a court case. She was real. She mattered. Her life had value. And her death was a failure, of people, of systems, of protections that never came. Today, Miranda's story lives in court documents and headlines. But it also lives in conversations about abuse, about vulnerability, about the legal obligations to report and respond. Her case has been used in classrooms and seminars on mandatory reporting laws. Her name has entered the public record, not as a statistic, but as a warning. Because what happened to Miranda Corsett wasn't just a tragedy. It was preventable. And that truth is the hardest one to live with. There is no tidy resolution. No outcome that can bring her back. But in her memory, there is an opportunity. To listen more closely. To speak when silence feels safer. And to protect the Mirandas of the world before it's too late. She was 16. And she deserved better. Miranda Corset's life ended in a place where no one was watching. But in death, her story has found an audience. Not for spectacle. Not for entertainment. But because every detail in this case asks us to think harder. About who we protect. About who we overlook. And about how silence can be louder than action. If there's anything left to take from Miranda's story, it's that being forgotten is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a child. And remembering, really remembering, starts here. Thank you for listening. If you found this story important, consider sharing it. Not for clicks. Not for numbers. But to make sure that Miranda Corset is never just another name lost in the system. This has been a case that deserves more than just justice. It deserves to be remembered.